Ladies and gentlemen, the New Orleans Saints just lost the mid-off game to the Los Angeles Rams, and it's their first loss under interim head coach Darren Rizzi. The Saints came out flat coming out of the bye week and showed us that they still aren't a good playoff-worthy team. 2 wins versus 2 bad teams under Darren Rizzi in the Atlanta Falcons and the Browns still hasn't changed the fact that the Saints still have a lot of issues on this roster. And now they sit at 4-8 going into week 14. We're going to be breaking down the Saints' loss to the Los Angeles Rams today in what appeared to be a mid-off game. Very unexciting and uninspiring, but we still got to talk about it. So let's dive into the Saints game. Offensively, why don't we talk about them first as we typically do? I thought they got off to a nice start. They ran the ball well. They had a lot of time of possession. I thought Clint Kubiak did an excellent job of having a game plan in the first half. The scripted first 15 plays I thought was very solid. The issue, though, with what the Saints were doing in the first half was they weren't able to finish off drives. Looking at their drives, they had 12 plays for 34 yards in 6 minutes, ended in a field goal. 14 plays for 57 yards, 8 minutes basically, and a missed field goal. 6 plays, 17 yards, and 3 minutes resulted in a punt, and 11 plays, 51 yards, 2 minutes, and a field goal. And the Saints' time of possession in the first quarter was 13 minutes and 58 seconds. Literally, the Rams had the ball for 1 minute. The Saints were dominating time of possession. They just could not execute. So basically, the Saints were not able to finish off drives. They weren't able to execute to the end and finish off these drives to get touchdowns and points. Now, granted, Alvin Kamara did have a touchdown that was called back due to a Talise Fuaga penalty. Some people may agree or disagree with it, but it was a penalty. It was called back, and the Saints were still not able to finish off, 4 drives in the first half to score a touchdown. And then a lot of people, I'm assuming, are going to want me to talk about this. Juwan Johnson had a dropped pass. Derek Carr threw a nice ball to Juwan Johnson. There is no penalty on this for pass interference, and had they thrown a flag for pass interference, maybe the Saints are set up in a good situation to score a touchdown in the first half of the game, but there was no penalty on this play. Either way, though, Juwan Johnson still should have caught it. And the reason why the Saints in the first half, I believe, were able to be a little bit more productive was the offensive line. They didn't look terrible in the first half, and they didn't really look terrible in the second half either. They did give up some bad moments and some pressures to Derek Carr, of course. That's how the game goes, but they allowed 0 sacks. They were able to run the ball for like 80 yards in the first half. So the offensive line was effective in the first half. It was just they couldn't finish, and I think a lot of that has to do with Derek Carr. He was throwing the ball quickly, not really looking downfield, throwing a lot of checkdowns in the first half, and at one point he was like 17 of 22 for like 80 yards. Like, that's not a good stat line. He wasn't taking any chances downfield, and I think that was a huge reason why the Saints were struggling to finish drives in the first half. Now, granted, Derek Carr is also playing behind the backup center and the second/third string left guard, and he doesn't have his starting receivers in Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, so he is going to have to throw the ball a little bit quicker and get the ball out faster than usual because he doesn't have a lot of his main guys. But once we got into the second half, we saw that the Rams made some adjustments, and as we've seen all season, Clint Kubiak struggled in the second half. He struggles to make counter adjustments too when teams figure out what they want to do against his offense. He always comes out with a great game plan. He always comes out firing shots and stuff. But then at halftime, once the other team makes an adjustment, then he starts to struggle. We saw today that running the football in the second half wasn't as effective. And when they weren't able to run the ball in the second half, then things got really tricky for him. They only scored 8 points in the second half, only scored 6 points in the first half, but in the first half, they were moving the ball more effectively than they were in the second. So like I said, as it's been an issue all season, Clint Kubiak struggled yet again to make adjustments to the other team in the second half of the game. And I also would like to mention that he did not use Taysom Hill enough, in my opinion. Taysom Hill was obviously involved a decent amount in this game. He did have 5 carries for 10 yards and his longest being 3. So the Rams really did shut down the running game for Taysom Hill. And in the passing game, he had 5 catches for 37 yards, including this nice play right here. This is a nice design from Clint Kubiak. Fakes blocks, gets the linebacker to come up to AK, and he sneaks behind him for a nice gain, tries to hurdle him. So Taysom Hill wasn't involved in the passing game, but I feel like he's definitely more effective as a runner, and they definitely could have used him as a runner better in this game, especially in this second half. Obviously, they could have used him more before he got injured, I believe, in the fourth quarter. Moving on from the offense as a whole, I want to talk about like individual performances. Let's talk about Derek Carr. He did not have his best day. He didn't have, in my opinion, a good day. Everyone's going to have different thoughts and excuses for him. I didn't think he had the best day as the Saints quarterback. He threw a lot of short check down passes early on, wasn't moving the ball effectively. He had a lot of low passes to Alvin Kamara. And honestly, he got bailed out a few times by his receiver, Kevin Austin Jr., like coming back to the ball after it was underthrown and thrown behind him. He didn't have the best day. He didn't turn the ball over, which is nice. And he went 24 of 37 for 184 yards. Like that's a low number of yards for this kind of amount of throws. But the biggest thing to me that was a huge issue was at the end of the game, with the game on the line, Derek Carr on fourth down has time to throw the football, just doesn't have pocket awareness, pump fakes to the right, looks over the middle and doesn't step up, doesn't really have pocket awareness. And when he finally decides to throw the football, time has run out. And he had time to throw on this play. He had enough time to make a decision. It wasn't like he had to be rushed. He had 4 seconds basically to get this ball out. That's more than enough time in the NFL. I also would like to mention, watch MVS right here. He looks to kind of be open, and as the defender is turning his hips to this receiver right here. I don't know if there's a guy behind MVS, but it looks like he could possibly be open. Derek Carr doesn't throw it, and I can't see if there's a safety over here at all. But Juwan Johnson also seems to possibly be open. I'm not saying he is. It looks like he could possibly be open as long as there's not a safety over there. Derek Carr doesn't get the ball out and ends up losing the football with the game on the line. He doesn't even attempt to pass. That's what's really crazy to me. And also, can we talk about Klint Kubiak real quick? This is a terrible play design after a terrible run up the middle on third down the play before. Why is he leaving Foster Moreau on an island with Jared Verse one-on-one and not putting his rookie left tackle who shut down Myles Garrett? Why is Foster Moreau the number 2 tight end blocking Verse? And also, why is there like no routes in the middle of the field at the sticks? Two big issues, two big red flags for Klint Kubiak. Can't make second half adjustments, and when the game is on the line, he doesn't call the right play. And of course, Derek Carr has not been able to come up big in big moments for the Saints in his tenure over the last 2 seasons. And then Foster Moreau's guy, coincidentally, is the guy who forces the pressure on Derek Carr. And something else that Derek Carr really didn't do well today, at least in the first half, he did have some nice plays in the second half, was throwing the ball downfield. He was 0 of 3 along with Matthew Stafford on passes thrown 10 or more yards downfield. So really, he was not able to connect basically past the first down marker on any passes. And to me, I mean, you can't be getting that from a guy you're paying $40 million to be your quarterback. Moving on to the next individual performance, I thought Alvin Kamara had another good game. He had another 100-yard rushing game, had 112 on 23 carries, and in the receiving game had 4 catches for 7 yards and a few drops. Not the best day receiving wise, at least, for Alvin Kamara. But Alvin Kamara has now 11 career 100-yard rushing games, including 3 this season, tying him for 5th in Saints history with Ruben May. So yet another accomplishment for Alvin Kamara in the Saints record books. I got a few like little things I want to compliment guys on. I thought the receiver room kind of did well today. MVS had another big play for the Saints today, had a touchdown. This was a really good throw from Derek Carr. Couldn't have placed it any better. Perfect pass. It seems like MVS and Derek Carr have really built up a connection. This was his 4th touchdown in 4 games for the Saints. He's really becoming a guy who the Saints should probably try to retain and keep for next season to complement Olave and Shaheed. I don't know if he fixes the receiver issues of a big-bodied, physical, contested, true X guy, but he does add some nice depth and big play ability. And with his 4 touchdown catches in his first 4 games with the Saints, he becomes the 2nd Saints player ever in franchise history to do that with Dante Stallworth. So now Marquez Valdes-Scantling is also a part of Saints history. And since joining the Saints, he has played 4 games, 8 catches, 237 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And granted, one of those games he didn't do too much, which was the Panthers game. I also would like to shout out Dante Pettis for this big boy physical catch on this 2-point conversion. This was a great catch, bailing out Derek Carr, who really did not throw the best ball, and I believe missed the guy open earlier on the 2-point conversion. This was an excellent catch from Dante Pettis. And also, I want to give a shout out to Kevin Austin Jr., who's had some really nice big boy, big time catches as well. He's been Mr. Reliable of the group. I want to see him get more opportunities, and hopefully the Saints sign him to the roster. That's all I got for the offense. I want to talk about Darren Rizzi next. Darren Rizzi gave the Saints a week off during the bye week, and then they came out looking like this. Came out flat, did not look great. He even changed the schedule last week of practice. They didn't practice Thursday, they practiced Tuesday instead. Gave the guys the day off. I get it's Thanksgiving, but if you're going to change up the practice schedule, you got to be able to pull off the win. And in a game where Rizzi needed a win, and it was a must-win game for Darren Rizzi to make himself one of the top head coaching candidates for the Saints job, he lost. And now when you look at Darren Rizzi, he's 2-1. The 2 teams he beat aren't that good, and the 1 team they lost to is a playoff team or a playoff contending team. So I think to me that just kind of says like maybe Darren Rizzi may not be the guy. He may be the guy and prove me wrong in the next 5 games. But from this point, like had they beaten the Rams, I'd be saying they should really consider hiring him. They lost to the Rams, and now it's like, okay, he might just be a guy who can win against bad teams and lose to good teams. And coming out of the bye week like this definitely hurt his stock. They're now 1-4 in 1-scored games this season, which the Saints simply just don't know how to win games. The 4 games they lost in the 1-scored games were the Eagles, the Falcons, the Panthers, and now the Rams. And the only one they have was the Falcons a few weeks ago. And Darren Rizzi said despite this, the players are so confident in the locker room. They're obviously still pissed off, and the bottom line, they have to win these games. In terms of preparation for Darren Rizzi and his group, coming out flat, that was not good. But some good things I thought he did in this game was chew out the ref for their bad calls, or at least from the Saints fan perspective, their bad calls. I like that he was aggressive. He did a fake punt, which worked, but also didn't work. The play itself didn't, but they ended up getting a first down. And I do like that Rizzi said had they scored at the end of the game, they would have went for 2 and gone for the win. I do like that. I like the aggressive nature and mentality. But unfortunately, due to Derek Carr's inability and awareness in the pocket, they didn't score at the end of the game, and they ended up losing. And speaking of Rizzi, why don't we just talk about the special teams? I thought Groupie had a mixed day. He did have a pretty nice tackle on a kickoff. Went 2 of 2 on 50-yard kicks, but had a miss from 34. So he had a shaky day, I'll say. He had a shaky day. Rico Payton had a nice tackle on the punt team. The kickoff coverage wasn't that great, though. So I think overall, for the standard that Darren Rizzi has set for the special teams, it definitely was not the best day for the special teams unit as a whole. Now moving on to the defense, I thought the defense actually got off to a great start. They held the Rams in a shutout. The opening half, Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua were nowhere to be heard of. They weren't doing anything. Alontae Taylor and Kool-Aid McKinstry were looking like the possible future of the Saints cornerback room. I was thinking Alontae Taylor just needed some time to adapt to outside corner again. Kool-Aid did his thing. The Rams were really struggling. Now granted, some of that was due to the dumbness of Sean McVay going for it on 4th down and 4 when you're in field goal range, and they didn't take points. But I thought the Saints defense did a nice job in the opening half to hold the Rams to a shutout. And for the Rams, they had not been shut out in the first half in 129 regular season games, which was an NFL record. And the last time they were shut out in the first half was in 2016 versus the Atlanta Falcons. So the Saints really did an excellent job of shutting out the Rams in the first half. It was the second half when the team made adjustments that the Saints started to struggle. But something that was consistent throughout the entire game was the fact that the Rams were able to run the ball all game long versus the Saints. They had 29 carries for 156 yards and a touchdown. No runs of over 17 yards, but basically the Rams in the second half basically came out saying, hey, we're going to force you to tackle us, and if you can't tackle us, we're going to keep running the ball on you. That's exactly what they did. and they scored. The tackling is still an issue. The run defense is still an issue. And Sean McVay figured that out in the first half, and he stuck with it in the second half, and it played a huge reason as to why the Saints lost in the mid-off. Also in the second half, the corners started to, or at least the secondary started to break. Puka Nacua started to cook. Alontae Taylor started to struggle again. Not as much as he has been in the last few weeks, but he was struggling. And per usual, the Saints gave up a big play in the game. Stafford with the play action here. Went deep downfield. I believe this was Alontae Taylor's man. No, that was Cooley McKinstry's man, actually. I thought that was Alontae Taylor. That one's on me. Stafford going right at the rookie and had a man wide open. That was Demarcus Robinson, I believe. And then this resulted in a touchdown for the Rams. And then also Ugo Amadi got cooked on the touchdown to Demarcus Robinson. So in the second half, the Saints secondary really was tested and they lost. The Saints secondary struggled as they have been over the last few weeks. One of the more frustrating parts of the game was when the Saints defense in a critical 3rd down and 10, they weren't set. So Darren Rizzi took a timeout. Good job from the interim head coach calling a timeout so he could get his players set and ready. 3rd down and 10 after a timeout, and they jump offsides, a neutral zone infraction after the timeout. And then on 3rd and 5, Alontae Taylor commits a pass interference on a play that was incomplete for Puka Nacua, and the Rams got the penalty, got the PI, and would end up scoring that drive. It was a bad sequence of events for the defense, and you got to wonder, would this have happened had Darren Rizzi not given them the week off, had they not changed the practice schedule, had they not had a change in their organized, structured schedule? Now, I don't really have any great shout-out performances for any Saints defensive players. I think Kool-Aid had an okay game. I got to rewatch it and stuff. But the one guy who stood out to me the most, at least, was Brian Brzee. He had a huge sack and a huge moment on 3rd down right here, which gave him his 6.5 sack of the season. Also on the opening drive, he had a near sack, forcing Matthew Stafford to throw the ball away. He was pretty dominant today. Development under a new defensive line coach. He leads the team in sacks. He had a really nice day today. I'd like to see him build upon this performance. A lot of his sacks have come from coverage cleanup sacks, but he seemed dominant today. And now with his 6.5 sacks on the season, Brzee is now tied with Leroy Glover and Nick Fairley for the 6th highest total in Saints history of sacks for a defensive tackle in a single season. So he's having himself a good year. I want to see him develop a little bit more, but overall, guys who stood out the most on defense was Brian Brzee. And as for injury updates, Taysom Hill is feared to have suffered a season-ending knee injury. That's not a surprise. His knee injury looks pretty bad. Nothing diagnosed for sure yet, but it isn't looking good. As for Tyrann Mathieu, who left the game early with a shoulder injury, he's expected to be fine and play next week. And as for Nick Saldiveri, I really don't know, but his injury also looked really bad. He had to be carted off the field. I really don't know what to expect, but I wouldn't be surprised either if Nick Saldiveri missed the rest of the season for the Saints. Final thing I want to talk about is for those of you who want to know about the draft position or possible playoff scenarios, we'll pull that up. So the Saints currently have the 9th overall pick in the draft. I believe it will stay that way no matter what happens tomorrow in the Cleveland game. So they have the 9th overall pick right now. And as for possible playoff scenarios, well, they're 3 games back from the Falcons and the Buccaneers. They basically have to win out to make the playoffs and hope the Falcons and Buccaneers basically lose out. I don't see that happening. The Saints would have to win the division to make the playoffs. And honestly, I don't see that outcome happening. So if you're going to be optimistic, the Saints need to win out. They have an easy schedule coming up. The Falcons and Bucs could lose some games. Maybe they win the division. But going to the playoffs is not an outcome I see the Saints having this season. Let me know what you make of the Saints' loss to the Rams. It was a pretty uninspiring, boring game. But hopefully you enjoyed this video and my content. And if you did, subscribe to my channel, Cash Sports, for more daily NFL content. Have a good one. Peace.